Hello, everyone. Today it is my great pleasure in the Where Are They Now series to be joined by Doug Kaufman, former CEO of TransLoc, a NCIDS seed grantee spring 2006, so 19 years ago. Yeah, one of the guinea pigs, if you will, back in the day. And we're really taking these series to, well, as the name implies, see what's up, how that journey was, and what you might be up to now. So, Doug, thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure to be here. I really appreciate you asking me to be on here and wanting to talk about some of the history of TransLoc.
Speaking of some of the history of TransLoc, I think one of probably and I'm going to speak for myself, so I don't mean to say that this would be what you would characterize as the biggest accomplishment of TransLoc, but it's certainly in entrepreneurial ecosystems when a startup company gets acquired, right? That exit, as we like to refer to it, that's a big deal. And TransLoc, you were a big deal early on in the 20-year history of NC because you got acquired, and it wasn't one of these acqui-hires. It was acquired by a company that's got a pretty big brand, if memory serves. You want to share a little bit? You want to jump in there, or
Sure, sure. We can start at the end and go backwards if
there
you
you
want.
go.
That's great. Yeah, so TransLoc was acquired by Ford, and we were in a very enviable position um, in that we were not looking to be acquired. We had actually just raised our one and only round of funding. We were doing well, and then Ford, and we can talk as much about how this all played out if you want. I'll keep it high level, but Ford indicated that they wanted to acquire us, and I just started saying no, thank you. We are not on the market. And as things progressed, we actually, and this is why I think it was really enviable, another very large, actually even larger company came along and also wanted to acquire us. So we had a very, it's great fortune not only to have one company that wants to acquire, but
Oh
two.
yeah.
And that's great for any company.
Oh yeah. Bidding wars are a wonderful thing if you're the one that the war is being fought over, for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
And just so we're super clear, we're talking the Ford Motor Company. Not like a Ford acquisition group or some sort of, hedge fund or other private equity deal. This is the Ford Motor Company. And, I think I was so anxious to get into that story. I failed to do a little bit of good housekeeping. That is, talk about like, what does TransLoc do, and what was it doing that, Ford and another large company were fighting over you?
Yeah, so TransLoc started with one product, as of course, with one product that really was the first product in the market that allowed transit agencies to bring their entire systems online so that they could not only see where are our buses, what time are they arriving at different stops, are they running routes efficiently, what's happening, but also riders could see where is my bus, when is it going to get here, get arrival prediction so they didn't have to stand out in the cold and rain for 30 minutes, not knowing when the bus is showing up. So that was really the start of TransLoc. And then over time, we started to develop more products that really made us more of a mobility company. And what I mean by that is it wasn't just fixed route buses going around in circles at universities. It moved to public and mass transit. We also started integrating other forms of mobility. We started bringing in data about riders and their trips, and more data about buses and how we could make the routes more efficient over time. We even started trying to integrate all the different forms of mobility. So buses, on-demand vehicles, Uber, Lyft, scooters, everything into one seamless mobility network. So it really moved from one very, it was an amazing product at the time to a full suite to help people get from point A to point B in the most efficient manner possible using any mode. And what Ford specifically was interested in is Ford realized, and I actually had this conversation with Bill Ford early on, where he recognized that the world was transitioning from selling combustion engine cars to individuals to a world of mobility. And one day cars are going to be electric and they're all going to drive themselves. And so are people going to even buy cars anymore? And so they wanted to make sure that Ford was in a leadership position for this new mobility world.
So this was a hedge for them.
In a sense, but it was, well, I guess for them, it wasn't a big hedge. It was a multi-billion-dollar hedge, not because we didn't get acquired for multi-billions. That would be great. But they actually decided to create a new company called Ford Smart Mobility. And they were going to acquire companies like TransLoc. And that company was going to figure out what is the world of mobility and what is Ford's position in this new world of mobility. So that sort of kicked things off. And they came to us because they were working on a project. Stop me if I'm getting too deep here. They were working on a project for non-emergency medical transportation. So for example, if you're in the hospital and you have to go home and they don't want to take you by, it's not an emergency, but they need to get you home and you can't drive yourself. They have vehicles and there are companies that will take you home and they charge a lot of money. And but it's all dynamic routing and all done in real time. And so Ford wanted to build their own version of this, and they were having trouble with the dynamic routing. We had actually built an on-demand service for transit agencies so they could use their paratransit vehicles, these little vans they have, to basically do what Uber and Lyft were doing, but the transit agency would do it, and we would connect it to the fixed route as well. So they came to us and said, you seem to be doing this really efficiently and effectively. Let's do a project together. Can we work with your dynamic routing engine and put that into our system? So we started working on that. They very quickly came back and said, yeah, this is really good. And we don't want to partner. We want to buy.
There you go.
That's what started the process.
I mean, it's always good when a client wants to just acquire you, right?
Yes.
So I want to make sure I'm clear on something. You guys were able to do dynamic routing before AI? I mean, what were there tech companies before AI?
No, that's a myth. There were no tech companies.
Yeah, that's what I thought.
Yeah, actually, well, I mean, when you have incredible people on the team, and if nothing else, TransLoc was filled with amazing people, and we had people that were brilliant and figured out how to do dynamic routing long before AI was the thing.
That's so cool. And I obviously I'm just being silly making the point that way, but I want to make sure that, these little sessions we do have a little bit of nutritional value, good calories, and to remind people because, the zeitgeist at the moment is that AI dominates everything and it's changing everything. And it's like, okay, slow your roll, right?
Right.
Very complicated things were done hundreds of years ago, right? I mean, pyramids were built without AI. So, you could, if you have the ingenuity, you'll figure stuff out. So
yes, that's right. That's right.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's, I think it is a story with nutritional value for founders that consider, right? Like you can turn customers, into more than just customers. They can be product development partners. They can be investors. And then eventually, they might be an acquirer or your exit strategy. And I think that's a great example for people to look at. I wonder if we could, like during your tenure, and this is just to get some perspective because it's also, this has been a very dynamic environment. What was like the ecosystem like? Was it just this? You think it was like what it is today, or was it just a little more contained? We've been hearing various stories, and it depends upon kind of like what your on ramp was and who you knew and who you connected to. Like you mentioned, you had just closed a round, before Ford and others came knocking. Was that was that the local capital stack, or, the usual suspects, or did you have to go out of state for that?
Yeah.
Just carte blanche on if you want to comment about the ecosystem.
Sure. Okay. So I just want to make sure I understand ecosystem, what you're asking. Are you talking about the transit ecosystem, our customers, or are you talking about the funding?
The funding support that you were getting. You guys were building a rapidly growing company. Did you do it all basically by yourselves in a silo, or were there organizations, individuals, and assets that you could leverage in the community to help you on that progress?
Yeah. No, it's a great question. And so TransLoc actually went years without raising money. I mean, like a decade, and just grew, organically based on, this is going to sound crazy, but selling a product,
What?
generating revenue, and using that revenue to then hire people appropriately over time. But then, of course, all that got shot to hell because I became the CEO. And part of the reason that I agreed to be CEO was I said, there is so much opportunity here. I think the best way we can actually achieve what we want to achieve and really basically just fulfill our true destiny is we're going to need outside capital. And so that was a radical shift for the company. And it took a lot of change to, as you know, if you transition from a bootstrap company to we're going to grow, we're going to scale, we're going to bring in capital, give everybody equity, we're going to hire rapidly, that requires massive change. I mean, most of the people that were in the company did not sign on for that when they were hired, and they were not living that life. And so there was a lot of change we had to go through, and we were going to lose money for some time, right? That was part of it, because we were going to go that classic J curve. Like, we're going to spend a lot up front, but then it's going to, pay off in the back end. So when we started looking for money, we definitely went through the process of making our list of who we wanted as investors. And there was a range. There were some angels. It was mostly VC. And there was one local VC that we really wanted in the round. And that was SJF, which is led by Dave Kirkpatrick. And outside of that, there were a variety. Obviously, we had a nice list, but right at the top of the list was Fontanelles Partners, which is a venture capital firm started by Bill Ford. So, and all they did was mobility. And so we knew having them on board, like, that's the smartest money we could get. There are incredibly smart investors. But if you're a mobility company and you're a transit company, there aren't a lot of investors in transit. That's the best one. So those were our top two, and fortunately, they actually became our co-lead investors.
That's incredible. And again, kudos, right? Because that's just so smart to look at it that way. And you mentioned that, like, it bringing on the money kind of changed the dynamics of the organization. You didn't use the word, but I'll use it, culture, like that it impacted the culture of the company. How did you're CEO, how did you bring everybody on board to understand, that this was happening? And did you have any attrition? Were there some that just weren't buying the vision? I don't want you to tell horror stories, but, when you change culture, like I've been, first 20 years of my career was doing startups. And so I understand culture is a very fragile thing, and you can get it wrong very easily without even trying. So I'm just curious from your perspective, what that felt like and looked like.
Yeah. I'm very glad that you asked the question about culture. I think it's incredibly important. And one of the interesting things about culture is that all companies end up with a culture at some point, whether they've gotten there deliberately or it just happened organically without any work or being mindful about it, which I think is actually quite dangerous. I think it is better to be mindful about it and proactively determine, what is it we want this company to be? So when I became CEO of the company, that was one of the first things we tackled, because up to that point, the company had no defined mission, vision, values, or overall culture.
That really blows my mind.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I think what often happens is it can be articulated at times in different ways. And I know Josh, the original founder and CEO, had a vision in mind, but it just wasn't put together in the way you often think of as a values, culture, et cetera. So we started off. One of the very first things we did after I became CEO is we took the small leadership team offsite to a bed and breakfast for a couple of days. And the main point was, we said, we are going to write out a mission, a vision, and values so that we can determine what culture do we want this company to have going forward. Okay. And one of the things, I'm jumping a little bit ahead, but one of the things we decided at that meeting was, I think it's okay for us to define the mission and vision and get started on the values, but we actually thought the people in the company should have a major role in creating the values. So we actually started on some, but then when we went back, we asked the company to provide the values they think the company should have, the people in the company. We asked them to say, give us what you think the values should be. And we went through a voting process to really narrow down the values.
How many people were in the company at this time?
Oh gosh, I want to say 30 or 40 maybe.
Okay, so it wasn't like a simple matter of getting 8 people into a conference room and saying, hey, tell us what you think the value should be. I mean,
no,
you even had to think about how you were going to approach this, right, to get the sample.
Yes.
And then how do you normalize against, the differing views, and how do you reconcile people that, would say, well, this should be our top value, and somebody else is saying, oh, hell no, it should be this.
Right. And to make it even, so all that is true. And to make it even more challenging, one of the strengths of the company was that we did not hire people who were just yes people. We hired deep thinkers and wanted people to question. So, so that made it, it wasn't like one round and everyone said, here are the 5 we agree on. This is great. Thank you, Doug. Let's move forward. There were strong opinions.
Yeah.
But that's how we ended up with a great foundation to the culture that we wanted to build.
I'm only laughing because I've done the same in my companies, and there isn't a member of the team here that would hesitate for a second to tell me if I'm screwing something up or I need to do something differently. And you got to have a thick skin if you're going to have really bright people, right? But the organization is so much better off for it. I don't know why more leaders don't do that.
No, well, I mean, we could have a whole episode on why they don't as well. But I will tell you that it was our culture got so good in terms of hiring. Well, let me rephrase that. We did such a good job of hiring people that were deep thinkers and did question things in good ways, that sometimes it was exhausting for me. And there was this one period, this one moment where I used to see an executive coach who was incredible. And I showed up at her office one day and I sat down and I was exhausted. And I said, her name is Rodney Evans. And I said, Rodney, just once, I would like to say to the people in my company, I think we should do this, and just have them respond by saying, that sounds good, Doug. Let's do it. And she looked at me, she tilted her head, and she said, really? That's what you want? That's bullshit. That's not what you want, because that's not what you built. And I was like, yeah, it's true, but it's tiring at times.
Oh, it could be exhausting.
Yeah.
But again, the long term, it's for the best of the mission and the organization. So,
well, we did it for a reason, and that's what we wanted.
So you had to, reset the culture. You had to say, we're going to be raising private equity. That brings some strings attached, right? Because you take money from people. Now you're bringing in an external influence to the organization. It sounds like you were really aligned. I mean, you've got Ford's venture arm, putting corporate VC ostensibly into you. So I can't imagine that they were, you hear some horror stories, right? Where a funder takes a, big position and then all of a sudden it's like, we want you to align with our portfolio, independent of like what your business interest is. And, I've heard some horror stories about that. Was there, stuff you had to overcome as you guys were working towards that exit? Or was everybody pretty much like, okay, Doug told us we were going to have to sign on to this, and we're getting now what, we had to sign on for?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there's a few things. I mean, one, we got acquired pretty quickly after raising the capital. It was 18 months.
Wow.
ballpark 18 months. So it happened pretty quickly. So we moved from, closing the round, starting to do all the things that we were supposed to do with the money into acquisition mode.
And what year round guesstimate this would be?
So we were acquired in early the beginning of 2018. So this would have been about middle of 2016.
2016, and the company 2005-ish
Yep.
founded.
4 or 5.
So again, overnight success, a decade in the making.
Absolutely. It's the way it
Yeah.
typically goes.
Yeah, it's a very common. One of the things I read, and this was a couple of years ago, I don't know, some Google alert picked up a story on TransLoc, and it was a quaint story back in the day that they said one of the things that which is unusual for large corporations that acquire, it's like, okay, now pack your shit, we're going to Detroit. But they said, no, we want you to stay in Durham, right? And there's a culture here with this organization that we value, and we want you to just be autonomous and run. Like, was that just dumb luck, or was that something you helped to guide them to understand? Like, you can buy it. Now that you've bought it, don't break it. I mean, that's kind of the metaphor I come up with, right? Like, because I've seen that happen too. You buy it and then they just do everything to crush the culture, and they basically screw it all up.
Yes.
So
Yeah.
is that something you had to Sherpa for them and help them with?
Yeah. So the brief answer is it started that way. So pre-acquisition, all of that was true. Post-acquisition, it changed. And I don't think there was anything nefarious here. It's just that Ford built, they created Ford Smart Mobility, and they recognized this is not a motor company initiative. We don't know this mobility world. It's a tech thing. So let's get leadership in place that knows tech and knows mobility and these other things, and not fill it with Ford Motor Company people. There's anything wrong with Ford Motor Company people, but they're not the most appropriate for this. And so all the discussions ahead were sort of what you're talking about. Like, we're certainly not buying you for your revenue, Doug, right? We did 160 billion top line revenue last year. Your revenue wouldn't even be a rounding error of like our toilet paper budget, right? Like, got it. You were buying us for these other reasons, these strategic reasons. And one of the things they did articulate over and over was our culture. Like, you have built something special here. We're trying to build Ford Smart Mobility. You could help us build that culture across that you have, bring that to Ford Smart Mobility. So there was discussion of that early on, and it was something we really pushed on and pushed on. Really, when I say pushed on, I meant this was something that we believed was important. We really wanted to do, and they were aligned with us in the early days.
So I think one of the other things that people maybe underappreciate, and I want to stay kind of apolitical, but if there are policymakers watching this, right, and we make the argument, like, why is it important to support, high potential startups? One of the things I think it gets really underappreciated is that post exit, founders and stakeholders and executives, they have more benefit than afterwards. And I know, just looking at your LinkedIn profile, you're, limited partner in the Triangle Tweener Fund and Coyote Ventures, for example. And we'll get to your company because you did a lot of stuff after TransLoc, but that means, you're staying in the community, you're deploying.
Yeah.
And I know I'm putting words in your mouth, so I'll shut up here in a second, but like, you're taking some of that sweet exit money, right? And you're redeploying into the next generation of founders in these funds, and how lucky are we in North Carolina to have the Tweener Fund? It's one of the most active funds in the country by PitchBook data. I'm going to let you expound on what this exit enabled you to do, and why it's important for people to understand the impact into our not just the ecosystem, but into the economy.
Yeah, for sure. It's so important. And I think I learned the importance of this way back in the day when I was lucky enough to be part of the educational technology company Blackboard. So I
Oh
was part of
yeah.
that company when it was a startup. And one of the things I learned from that was that Blackboard was able to create their own ecosystem. And what I mean by that is it had such incredible people, got big enough, had so much success, impacted the education landscape so much that all these entrepreneurial people inside the company would leave and start other companies in education, right? So the ripple effects were incredible, and an entire ecosystem spawned up around Blackboard and helped education. Okay, so I learned that early on. One of the things I liked most when I moved to this area was it has a unique entrepreneurial community in that there is, in my view, maybe others would argue with me, I believe this area has a rising tide lifts all ship mentality. Okay, and so I think it is with those types of people and that type of culture. Talking about culture, I think the area has a culture. It seems natural to want to help each other. And if you happen to have a success, you want to help others have the same kind of success to create those ripple effects and lift the entire community up, right? And so I think it's incredibly important. I think Scott and now Robbie have done amazing, and their team have done amazing work with Tweener. So when Scott came to me and said, hey, I'm thinking of doing this Tweener thing, I said, what is it? And he said, the Tweener list, we'd like to make it into a fund. I said, I'm in. That was it. I was like, of course, what better way to do this and lift everybody up? And it was even more enticing to me because he said, well, if you're an LP, these CEOs that we're investing in, they'll get access to you and everybody else that's an LP. And I'm like, this is incredible. Like, this is exactly what I want to do. So, so I was eager to join it, and I'm excited that I did. And I wish there was just more. I will tell you, those are all the positives. I have seen some times where it was not happening, and it was incredibly frustrating to me. So as an example, you may remember the company Momentum Learning.
Oh yeah.
By Jessica Mitch.
Yeah.
So I was an early investor in that. And to me, there were many reasons why I thought Jessica was great and what she was doing was great and everybody should invest in this. Not the least of which is this will help rise,
it's workforce development.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We are training our workforce 100%. And so to me, it's like, what better company to invest in if you're interested in lifting up the ecosystem? And I personally went to multiple people that had significant exits, way bigger than mine, and was like, throw 25,000 in. And I got quite a bit of pushback, and I was shocked, and it was frustrating. So it's not perfect. It does happen that there are, there's some holes. We still have to do better. But I think compared to most of the country, our ecosystem is incredible.
That's one of those topics like you said earlier in this conversation. Oh, how much time do we have to talk about that? So,
yeah.
We've been, the economic impact of what we do is undeniable, and it'll be measured in billions of dollars. We've funded and helped over 600 companies over these 20 years. Amazing. There's been close to 40 exits. And we have been frankly overspending for the last 5 years. As soon as COVID hit, the team here and the board, because I'm blessed with a great board and an incredible team, we said, like, we can't just worry about ourselves, right? And we didn't quite commit to doing like a burn down. Yeah. But we said we got to figure out ways to do more, and if we had it, we could deploy it. Because, our grant cycles, when we take in applications and we review them, all the work to scrub 150 seed and 180, micro grants, that's sunk cost.
Yeah.
And where we draw the line, here are the 6 seed grantees for this, the spring cycle we're working on right now, as a matter of fact.
Yep.
Right. Like the difference, the qualitative difference between number 6, the last to get a grant, and number 7, the first not to, that's subjective. I mean, I'll let you in on a secret, right? We don't definitively know. There's always a cliff, but it's never where we draw the line.
Yeah.
Right. So I went a few years out, on the board, said, like, let's see if we can raise some money. And so the first thing we did was, let's go talk to the people that exited, right, that we had funded.
Yep.
And so I'm not surprised at your experience with Momentum, because like I was just like, oh my goodness, you had like a $35 million walk away and you don't want to give like 100 grand, like fund 2 seed grants, right?
Right.
And the answers we were getting like were, you didn't set that expectation when I got the grant. So I'll do,
Oh
when I'm old, I'll worry about philanthropy, right?
my
Like,
gosh.
very little altruism, at all. And I was disappointed by that. I mean, like, I agree with you wholeheartedly that there is a, rising tide here. And I've done this work. I mean, I've done it globally and I've done it nationally. And we do have something special here, right? You go to the Valley, you go to New York, it's like, I'm not telling you what I got, right?
That's
Like,
that's right.
my gain has to come at for some perceived reason, it has to come at your expense.
Right.
So, if you've ever been outside of this ecosystem, you know how special it is here. And that's
Absolutely.
good, right?
Yeah.
But even, and I get in trouble, I piss a few people off when I say this, like, the kind of the old guard capital stack, we survey our companies. We know, for example, in the last 2.5 years, they've raised a phenomenal amount. And, last year it was like winter's coming, you
Yeah.
got stockpile their cash. Nobody's writing easy checks anymore. Yet we had like something like close to 200 million in raises over 57 funding events. But here's the kicker. Over 70% of that cash came from out of state. So my hackles get raised when I say, like, so what are all these funds out of the state seeing our companies
Yeah.
that our funds don't see? And I know sometimes it's just niche, right? It's just, we don't invest in ag tech, but I don't know. It just, because for me, it's every time, and because the checks are getting bigger, right? And we know that there's aggregation and syndication, and it's going later stage, bigger stream. And there's a point where that check gets big enough. It
Yeah.
does come. It's still old fashioned. I mean, COVID taught us you don't have to be, in the backyard anymore. But when the check gets big enough, there's still this notion that, yeah, if we're writing, 10 million or more, we probably want you closer.
Yeah.
And I don't want to be producing a farm team for other states.
Oh, I'm with you. And you said, you're going to piss some people off. I'll let me piss some people off now.
Thank you. I welcome the company.
Yeah. So one of the things I have experienced personally that I think is plays a role in what you're just talking about, with limiting the limits of the local investors and why others are having success coming here. Perhaps this has changed now, but just recently, within the last few years, one of the things I have seen is that local VC firms did not want to do safes. And when I first started raising money for my current company, I think the numbers were something like maybe over 90%, 80 or 90% of all pre-seed deals were done nationally, were done with safes. Okay. Yet people here were like, there's no chance we will invest if you're doing a safe. And some of these local LPs, some of these local VC firms wanted me to be an LP. And I said, why in the world would I invest my money in a VC firm that immediately shuts off 90% of the opportunities immediately because they don't like the investment vehicle that the rest of the country is using? I'm like, this makes no sense at all to me. And so I think that has started to change, and at least I hope.
Begrudgingly,
right? But that is opportunity, right? Now you're opening up the world. You're opening up your firm to significantly more investments. You don't have to invest in them if you don't like them. Don't invest, but don't say we won't do that.
Yeah. I'm right there with you. That's one leg of the three-legged stool. The second leg I would throw out there is, valuations. Mm-hmm. And there's just like this psychology around, these ceilings, and, you can't raise above X because, the numbers don't make sense. And when you take subsequent rounds, we won't get the multiple that we need to get. And, the way we've seen it is, companies that we have funded that have really great high potential, they just go elsewhere.
Yep.
Right. And we have seed grantees that have raised, tens of millions of dollars, and there's not a dime of it local.
Right.
And, at some point, market forces will just kick in, and
Yep.
people will either just get tired of missing out on some of these big exits,
Yeah.
or new funds will come in, which we're starting to see. But
Yep.
I didn't want to pass up a point about, the tweener fund. And it goes back to this, it's a little bit in the weeds about the ecosystem. So, not only is it one of the most active funds in the country, but it's also a great step for our companies, right? It extends the runway. So like a third of the tweener funded companies, came through us first.
Yeah.
Really. And that's what we see ourselves as, right? We're that on ramp, and we are thankful. I mean, we do have, representatives from most of the funds in the area that serve as core reviewers, and we really appreciate that service. Because they bring a perspective that's relevant, and our companies need to understand that, and we are very appreciative of that.
Yeah.
I just think there's enough room for everybody to share on the upside that we can get let's get a little more malleable so that we can get some of these deals done and keep as much of it, in the geography of the state as possible.
No, I agree. I agree with you.
So let's try to land the plane, but and I just, want to just ask, from your perspective personally, what are you up to now? What do you see the ecosystem doing, or if anything, you might just be happy doing your thing and you don't really need to look at the ecosystem anymore. I don't know, but give us some parting thoughts on Dr. Doug Kaufman.
Okay. So what am I doing now? So I'm actually doing a few different things. I'll leave my what am I doing as a, father and friend and partner and all these things off. But professionally, I'm doing, I guess you could say I'm doing three things. So one is I am very fortunate that I was asked to teach a course at Duke University. And so I have been teaching that course. It's in the Innovation and Entrepreneurship program, and that has just been great. I really, really enjoy it, and I'm so thankful to Jamie Jones for giving me the opportunity and get to work.
She's done incredible work with the I&E Center there.
She's great. She's like the James Brown of work, right? She's of academia. She is doing more work, the hardest working person I've seen. Great stuff. And so I'm really thankful that I have that opportunity. So there's that. I also started another company a few years ago called Belongly. It is in the mental health space. And what we do is we try to support mental health providers to be more successful and have better outcomes with their clients. And we do that in a variety of ways. One of the things that we do that I'll mention very quickly is it turns out that one of, if not the most important factor in success in therapy is whether you actually have a warm, trusting, collaborative relationship between the therapist and the client, right? So if I'm your therapist, if I'm the world's foremost expert in depression treatment, and you come to me for help, we have our first session and you leave and you say, oh my God, I never want to talk to that guy again. He's awful. Doesn't matter that I'm the best in the world. And it doesn't matter that I accept your insurance and all those things, right? But nobody matches clients with therapists on this thing. And so we said, we're going to do that. It's the biggest, it's the way to have the biggest impact. So
was that just a gap that you saw in the market?
Yeah.
And you just scratched your entrepreneurial itch. I think your PhD is in
psychology. Yeah. So we had built an entire platform, a community of mental health providers. We created a peer-to-peer, so a therapist-to-therapist referral platform. But this, we learned over time, we said, well, where can we have the biggest impact? And that was it. And so, I have to say, we were only able to really do this well because of AI. And the fact that we have good people. So we used the power of AI to build a system that matches clients with therapists based on the probability that they will have this warm, collaborative, trusting relationship to be more successful. So there's that. And the third thing that I just recently started doing is I've started coaching. Sort of high achiever CEO. You don't have to be a CEO, but imagine high achieving, high net worth often people that have not been able to, they've had success, but they haven't been able to bring their success and their life fulfillment, happiness, joy, etc., into alignment. And so why is it I've made all this money and I get all this press, I get all these things, I should be the happiest person in the world, and I'm just not, and I don't know what to do about it? Those are people that I have been trying to work with more recently.
So you're going to be the Rodney Evans for the next generation of Doug Kaufmans.
I have very little chance of being Rodney, but if I can be half as good as her, I think I can help a lot of people.
Good for you. And again, it just shows you give back, right? And that's why entrepreneurs are so essential to our economy, to society. They're building strong communities, building the amenities that we all take for granted. I can't think of a better way to end by just reflecting on what you just said. So, Doug, thank you so much for joining us today on the Where Are They Now series. I know it's been some time, but please know that you are welcome at NCID at any time, and you have friends here. And I just wish you continued success in everything that you're doing.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I appreciate all that. And I love the work y'all are doing. So keep doing it.
Great.
All right.